Disabilities Issues and Updates on BCTV is supported by the Berks County Center for Independent Living, Abilities in Motion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brianna McGovern. I am the Disability Resource Manager for Abilities in Motion, and I am your host for today. Thank you for joining us here on Disability Issues and Updates, where we talk about the current events that are happening in our disability community. This month, we have two guests with us who are also from Abilities in Motion. To my left, we have Ed Granger, who is our Independent Living Services Program Director, and we have Jenna Laczkowski, who is our Development Manager. Before I guess we get started, do you guys want to tell us what you guys do for AIM?
So as the director of the Independent Living Resources area, I'm responsible for programs that deliver services based on the core services that all centers for independent living are responsible for. So that would be information and referral services, advocacy services, independent living skills, and peer support. And then in addition to that, we also have some employment services.
I am the development manager. So I deal with development marketing and communications. So I write grants, fundraise, anything that raises money for our mission.
Awesome, awesome. And before we get started, we always want to give our shout out to Miss Beth, who is our American Sign Language interpreter from the Keystone Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. Thank you, Beth, for being here today. So today's show is going to be focused on advocacy and voting rights as the midterm elections are coming up on November 8th. Do you guys have any background in the political science industry?
I personally have worked on a couple of campaigns, but I'm not super well versed in actually the campaign part of it. But I am a lifelong voter, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have my voice heard when I cast my ballot each time there's an election.
I do have a background. I have my bachelor's in public policy. I have my master's in public administration. Pursuing my doctorate in public administration. Then I worked on two presidential campaigns and a congressional.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wish I was like that. I'm still young. I'll get there one day.
It's the best time to do it.
Absolutely. So one of AIM's core services, along with many other centers for independent living that they offer, is advocacy services. Now AIM, we of course provide both self-advocacy and systems advocacy services. In your own words, why is it important that people with disabilities learn to advocate for themselves?
That's a great question, and I'm going to kind of break your rule because you said in my own words, and one of the things that we do when we talk to people about voting is we share a quote from Justin Dart, who is the co-founder of the ADA and also of the American Association of People with Disabilities. And Justin Dart said, "Vote as if your life depends on it, because it does." So we just think it's really important for people with disabilities to have their voices heard when it comes to policies, rules, laws that directly impact them and affect them. And I think we saw with COVID how important that is, because there was an incident you may be familiar with at the beginning of this year where the director of the Centers for Disease Control pretty much said that since most people who are dying from COVID had comorbidities, they were people she described as already unwell, that this was somehow good news. And the disability community was very quick to respond to that and say, this doesn't obviously represent us, and just demonstrates that we need to have our voices heard more in discussions around what the response to the pandemic should be like. So that's just an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's 1 in 5 people have a disability, and because since the outbreak of COVID-19, there has been 10 million newly disabled people due to the illness. So those people really need to go out and vote and have their voice heard. People with disabilities, along with every citizen, should vote because your voice is powerful and you have the right to vote.
Absolutely.
And I think too, just to pick up on Jenna's point, people with disabilities have their own unique concerns, interests, things that they want to make their voices heard on. So it really is an individual choice and an individual decision based on everybody's perspective on the candidates, on the issues, and everybody's different. The community is very diverse.
And to break it down just a little bit further, when we say that we voice for self-advocacy and systems advocacy, self-advocacy is when we encourage our consumers to empower themselves to be able to actively advocate for themselves in their own personal life, versus systems advocacy, of course, is the voting aspect of it. And along with the question that I just gave you guys, a lot of people kind of feel like that their voice isn't going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. That's a common theme amongst people with voting. So you guys mentioned it a little bit, but why is it important that people with disabilities vote for them? And so it's not just about the advocating, but a lot of people feel like, well, my voice isn't really going to matter in the large, grander picture. So why is it so important for people with disabilities to make sure that they have their voices heard? Because it's just as important.
Well, and I think there is strength in numbers. You know, again, everybody's concerns are unique. And what you mentioned was kind of that voting is kind of a systems advocacy thing, but it's also an individual advocacy thing in terms of, again, individual rights, concerns, interests of people. So I think what we saw with the CDC example that I mentioned earlier is we saw a response, and that response came from 150 different disability rights organizations to say, no, this is not the way things should be done. Things should be done differently. But that was in turn based on the voices of each individual person who was a part of those organizations or who had been touched by those organizations. So it really is one of those kind of things where we talk about grassroots, and it really is a matter of those individual voices becoming a collective voice. And when that happens, powerful things can happen. And in the example I just gave, you had a dialogue with the CDC around people with disabilities and COVID that might not have happened otherwise.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are statistics saying that people with disabilities have come out and are voting in greater numbers. According to the report from the Center of American Progress, nearly 62% of voters with disabilities cast a ballot in the November 2020 election. And that's compared to 56% in 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys actually mentioned this already, but of course, since the pandemic changed pretty much everything in the way that we function, and including those specifically pertaining to the disability community. For those who have health issues, it's no longer considered exactly safe for people to go out at times. You want to limit your exposure as much as possible. So with that being said, the traditional way of voting is you go to the polls. So what are some other options for voting that people, not just the disability community, but everybody, what are some different ways that we can now vote since the pandemic has started?
Right, that's a great question. Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing for people because there are so many different ways to vote, and they're each a little different, and they have their own requirements. And that's one of the reasons that we have a voting project at AIM where people can call us. Our main number, they can call our main number 610-376-0010, and if they ask to speak to an independent living specialist, that person can really simplify this for them and actually walk them through the process. And we do recommend that people go to vote.pa.gov because it outlines a lot of this. But again, just to break it down, people in Pennsylvania have the option of voting by a mail ballot. So they have to request a mail ballot, and there are a number of different ways to do that. There's an online application to receive a mail ballot. They can go to their county election board and receive a mail ballot, or they can send by mail a request to receive a mail ballot. So that gives them the option of not having to go to the polling place. As long as that ballot has been requested by November 1st and is received at the county election board by November 8th at 8 p.m., then their vote will count and their voice will be heard. It is good for people to be aware that there is some ID requirement to request that ballot, but it's pretty simple. They can use a driver's license, they can use a pen.ID, the last 4 digits of their social security number, and even if they don't have options for those things, there are some ways that they can manage to vote and request that ballot. And you can also submit a request to have a ballot sent to you. And if you're not able to take that ballot back in person, you can request that somebody do that for you. So somebody who has a disability can request that someone else kind of be the person that actually delivers that ballot. If they choose to mail it in, that's fine. If they choose to take it to a drop box, they can have someone else do that for them.
Yeah. people are still going to end up going to the polls. It's something I look forward to every election. I've always liked going to the polls. One thing people always ask me about are poll watchers. So poll watchers are usually about 2 people from each campaign. So you'll see them around. They're kind of checking how many people are coming in. But one of the things you need to know is that the poll watchers, they can't engage in voter intimidation. And that's something that has happened within our state, within the US. So if you feel like someone's photographing you or they're videoing you, any type of intimidation, you want to make sure you can call 866 Our Vote, and they'll be able to help you with that. And the polls are open until 8 p.m. So if you are in line and it is 8 p.m., you have the right to vote. No one can tell you to get out of line. And that's the most important part, especially because when people go to vote later on, it's very crowded.
And can I just add to that? That's not the only method to vote in person. You can also vote early.
Yes.
In person. So that's why we have these stickers on for voting early day. And official voting early day, the campaign is October 28th, which is next Friday. So people can go to the county elections office. They can request the mail-in ballot there, and they can fill out the mail-in ballot. They can deliver it. It can be reviewed. They can get their ballot. They can complete their ballot, and they can vote. So they can actually vote in person early. And then you're not necessarily, you're voting in person, you're not necessarily going to a crowded polling place, which for some people, they may be a little more comfortable with that. They may not want to do the mail-in balloting for one reason or another, but you can also do that in person. And again, someone who has a disability, someone else can deliver their ballot for them, and they can request assistance with completing ballots.
Yeah, they can request assistance, especially if you are voting in person. It just can't be your union representative or your employer. It can't be a judge of elections. And if you're going in person, there are a lot of accessible features in Berks County especially. So they have a tactical keyboard, buttons of different shapes, labels in Braille, headphone jack, dual switch jack, compatible with 2-position rocker switches, and a sip and puff device. And you can always ask for help from a poll worker. The other features that they have contrast, so it changes the size of the screen to high definition and high contrast, white and black background. It zooms, audio speed, audio volume, and the display can make the screen blank for your privacy.
Right, and so the first time someone does get assistance at the polls, there is a declaration of need for assistance that they're going to need to fill out for at least that first time.
Yes.
But people, might be good for them to know that they need to request that, so they're prepared to do that when they go to the polls. So that is another piece to the puzzle.
Right.
I think it's also important to stress, as Ed mentioned before, we are providing assistance in terms of registration and just generalized information if you have questions in regards to the voting process. I think it's important because a lot of people don't like to talk about politics or their views because it can really almost turn into a combative situation, and I think it's important that we stress that AIM is it nonpartisan?
Nonpartisan.
We are nonpartisan. We will not express any one side. We will stay very neutral. We will not judge people.
Nor will we ask.
Nor will we ask, exactly. We will remain completely neutral. We want people to feel encouraged to be able to express their views, and you can't really do that when you kind of go when you express one way or the other. So I do think it is important to let people know that they don't have any concerns or worries about calling in for help, because we will not express anything particular, very specific.
Right.
And again, I'll mention that vote.pa.gov is a great resource. That
yes,
website,
absolutely.
And a lot of the elements about accessible voting that Jenna just described for us. If you want to learn about those, or you weren't jotting down that list, you can go to vote.pa.gov, and there's a great map on there where you can click on your county. You can click on Berks County, and it will give you the information specific to Berks County, which is really important to have. So it'll tell you, what to expect at the polls, what kind of accessibility is available, and it'll also give you locations and times for some drop boxes where you can actually go and drop your mail ballot off.
Right.
If you don't put it in the mail, you can take it to the election board, but there's also a list of times that those drop boxes are available, so you can just go and put it in the box and be done.
Right. And that website as well, if you're not sure that you're registered or maybe you've moved recently and you're thinking to yourself, did I ever change that? That's the perfect website to check. And you have until Monday to register or change your address. So make sure everybody is checking on that, because I checked 2 weeks ago and said, oh no, I never put in my new address, and got that all fixed up.
So again, that's Monday the 24th.
Yes.
If you're a numbers person instead of a day of the week person. So just to review, the Monday the 24th is the last day to register.
Yes.
The 11/1 is the last day to request a mail-in ballot.
Right.
And then the ballot has to be in by 8 p.m. on November 8th, which of course is election day and the day that people will be going to their polling places while they're open, and maybe staying in line if there's a big line, and it's open after. It needs to stay open after the official hours.
Yes, and I know I've done this before. I've requested a mail-in ballot, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to the polls. Make sure you bring that with you. If you can't, you still can do a provision ballot, but try and remember where it is. I did not, and I was still able to vote, especially if you're voting at a new place. If your name is not on the books, again, you can still vote, and it'll be voting with a provision ballot.
And you do need to remember, if you did already mail your ballot in, don't go to the polls.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah.
So you only get one. You get one vote. That's how
one and done.
That's how democracy works.
Yeah.
So you have a choice of which of those two things to do.
Right.
And I think it's also good to reiterate that do not hesitate to ask for help when you go to the polls. If you decide not to do mail-in ballots and you want to do things in person, or if you just have general questions, we're always encouraging people. You always want to be able to feel comfortable enough to say, can you help me, or can you provide me with more information on that? So, we don't want people to feel discouraged about not voting because they don't feel comfortable in asking questions. People at the county election boards, they're there for that reason. They're there to help you, and I believe they're nonpartisan as well.
Yes.
They're there to help you fulfill that process because they want people to vote as well.
And one more option I want to mention for people with disabilities is the absentee ballot. And that is specifically for people who are just not going to be at their polling place or at their place of residence on election day, or someone who has a disability. So if you do have a disability, you also have the option of requesting an absentee ballot and voting that way as well.
Yeah. And just to go off of your asking for help, as someone who has worked the polls most election cycles in one way or another, everybody there is so knowledgeable. They're very, very nice. So if you have any questions, they're so used to questions as well. I would definitely, don't be afraid to ask.
Don't be afraid to ask, and then always make sure, I know one of the things that they reiterate throughout the pa.gov website is to make sure all your documents are signed,
Yes.
that they're all in their necessary envelopes, because I think you have to put in like 2 or 3 different envelopes, and make sure that everything is in necessary order, because that is actually very important. You want to make sure that everything is signed and put in the required envelopes for ballots.
Yeah, but I will say, if you are going to the polls in person, you do not have to show ID. And if somebody asks you for ID, you do not have to show it to them. And again, that number that I had mentioned before, you can definitely call them in case that becomes an issue, and that's 866-OUR-VOTE.
Wonderful. Well, we are almost coming to a close here, and before we end, is there anything that you guys wanted to mention that might be happening at AIM? I know you mentioned our Voters Project, which we will continue as the election process or the midterm elections approach, but did you guys have anything that you wanted to mention before we close out?
I believe you guys are doing a transportation program, correct?
We are. So I believe I mentioned it this last month. We are hosting a second public transportation information session, which is going to provide information on the different transportation options available to the disability community. So we will be providing information on things like BARDA, which is our local transportation for Berks County. And this session will actually be held in partnership with Tower Health. We will be holding it on the hospital grounds in the Friends Room from 4:30 to 5:30, and that will actually be this Monday, October 24th. So come out if you have any questions. You can be a consumer or you could be a representative. This is really going to be beneficial for those in the disability community who are really seeking for transportation, whether it's BARDA transportation or if it's something outside of BARDA.
And we're prepared and we're available to walk people through the application process. We do that all the time, one-to-one, and we're happy to do that. if someone can't make it to the transportation session, or they come and then they sort of get stuck while filling it out. So we're always available to assist.
And if you guys have any questions in regards to any of AIM's services that we provide, please, again, as Ed mentioned before, give us a call at 610-376-0010, and an independent living specialist will be more than happy to help you. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next November.
Disabilities Issues and Updates on BCTV is supported by the Berks County Center for Independent Living, Abilities in Motion.